Please like, share, and subscribe. Wishing you happiness and good luck every day.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a really powerful idea, a framework for tackling some of the world's biggest challenges. It's called social value investing. So, let's kick things off with a quote from the man who actually inspired the name, Warren Buffett himself. His whole idea of being a realistic optimist. That's the perfect mindset for what we're talking about today. See, this isn't about just, blind hope. It's about confidence. Confidence in strategies that are proven to work that can actually build a better world for all of us. And trust me, Buffett's optimism, it's not just talk. Back in 2006, he made this absolutely mind-blowing announcement. He was giving away his entire fortune, which at the time was something like $44 billion, all to benefit humanity. I mean, wow, that was one of the biggest charitable gifts in history. And a pledge that huge brings up a really fundamental question, right? And it's one that goes way beyond just billionaires. It's a challenge that governments, nonprofits, even your local community groups grapple with every single day. How do you actually turn money and resources into real, lasting well-being for people? Okay, so to really wrap our heads around this, let's jump into a classic story. A perfect example of when the old ways of doing things they just weren't cutting it. So I want you to picture this. New York City in the 1970s. The city was going through a really tough time, a period of serious decline. It was a completely different world from the vibrant city we think of today. And right at the heart of it all was Central Park. It wasn't the beautiful green oasis it is today. No way. It had actually become one of the most dangerous places in the entire city. It was this powerful symbol of urban decay. And the city government, they were trying to deal with it on their own, and they were just completely overwhelmed. The old model, it was broken. So, what changed? What turned it all around? Well, it wasn't some massive new government program, and it wasn't a big private company swooping in to save the day. It was something totally new. The local community itself mobilized. They created something called the Central Park Conservancy. They got volunteers, they raised millions in private support, and this is the most important part, they didn't go it alone. They partnered with the city. So the city still owns the park, right? But it's the Conservancy that actually runs it day to day. So what we're really looking at here is a perfect example of something called a cross-sector partnership. It's a fancy term, but the idea is simple. It's when organizations from totally different worlds, the government, private businesses, and nonprofits, they all voluntarily team up to hit a common goal. And what's so powerful about this is that it can overcome the limitations that hold each of them back when they try to do things all by themselves. Now, let's see how this idea of partnership evolves into a full-blown management framework. And what's really cool is where it gets its name and its core principles. Because you see, the incredible turnaround of Central Park, that wasn't just a lucky break. It wasn't a one-off. It showed that there was a repeatable strategy here. And that raised a much, much bigger question. How can we do this again and again? How do we consistently create these kinds of successful partnerships to tackle our most complex social problems? And this is where the big analogy really clicks into place. On the one hand, you've got value investing. That's the famous strategy Warren Buffett used to find hidden financial value in companies. But on the other hand, you have social value investing, and it uses the exact same playbook. It's a long-term strategy. It focuses on strong leadership and real intrinsic worth. And here's the twist. Instead of looking for a financial return, the goal is to unlock hidden social value. It's all about creating public benefit through these amazing partnerships. So that's the big idea, but how do you actually do it? How do you make these partnerships work in the real world? Well, that brings us to the practical toolkit for getting it done. Now, take a look at how this is laid out. It's not just a simple checklist, right? You don't just go from 1 to 5. Think of it more like a dynamic system. You've got these 5 core elements, and they're all interconnected. For one of these partnerships to really make a difference, all of these pieces have to be working in harmony. Let's just break these down real quick. First up is process. This is your game plan, making sure everyone is on the same page with a shared strategy. Then you've got people. You absolutely need great leaders who can coordinate everything and everyone. Third is place. This is so important. It's all about empowering the actual community to be a part of the planning and take real ownership. Number 4 is portfolio. Think of this like diversifying your investments. You're blending resources from all the different partners to spread out the risk and get more bang for your buck. And last but not least, performance. You got to know if it's working, right? This is about having a common way to measure your social impact. Put them all together, and these 5 Ps give you a really solid roadmap for success. So let's zoom back out. What's the big takeaway from all this? What does it all add up to? Well, it brings us right back to that idea of optimism we started with. It completely reframes it. See, it's not just blind hope anymore. It's a realistic, proven belief. A belief that we really can build a better future, but only when we work together in smart, effective ways. Social value investing gives us a playbook, a practical guide for tackling problems that once seemed totally unsolvable. And that really brings us to the final and maybe the most important point of all. This whole framework, it's not just for mega projects like turning around Central Park. It's a whole new way of looking at the world around you. It's like putting on a new pair of glasses that helps you see opportunities for collaboration and success right where you live, in your own backyard. So the big question I want to leave you with is, where could a partnership like this transform your community?
So, have you ever stopped to think about how we actually solve the world's biggest problems? Things like ending poverty or even getting to space. The way we organize ourselves to get these massive things done, well, it's gone through this incredible evolution. So how did we get from there to here? Let's dive into the fascinating story of how we move from relying on just one player to building these powerful teams that span all of society.
Okay, so first, let's just set the stage a little. Think about the challenges we're staring down today. We're talking about a changing climate, global health crises that can literally circle the planet in days, massive inequality. I mean, these are not problems that any one group can fix. They're all tangled together, they cross borders, and they demand a level of teamwork we've frankly never seen before.
And that really brings us to the big question, right? When the government alone isn't enough, and businesses can't do it on their own, and nonprofits are stretched thin, what's the answer? How do we build something that's way bigger than the sum of its parts?
A perfect example of this is the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. Now, this isn't just some big to-do list. It's basically a global roadmap for a better future. And you know what the most telling part is? Goal number 17. It is specifically about creating partnerships to achieve all the other goals. It turns out the solution is baked right into the problem itself.
And this leads us to our key idea here, the cross-sector partnership. Put simply, it's a formal team-up. It's when government, business, and the nonprofit world all sit down at the same table. They pool their unique skills, their resources, and they work together to hit a common goal that helps everybody. This is the powerful new model we're going to unpack for the rest of this explainer.
But, to really understand where we are now, we have to go back in time and see where we've been. For a huge chunk of modern history, whenever a massive problem cropped up, there was really only one place everyone looked for a solution: the government.
And for a long, long time, this model worked, and it created incredible results. I mean, just think about it. The government, working with private companies, linked an entire continent with the Transcontinental Railroad. It rebuilt the whole economy with the New Deal. It created the arteries of modern commerce with the interstate highway system. And yeah, it even put a person on the moon with the Apollo program. These were absolutely monumental achievements, all led from the top down. You can really feel the spirit of that era in this famous quote from Franklin D. Roosevelt during the Great Depression. His administration didn't just offer up hopeful words, it took massive, decisive action. The New Deal was this whirlwind of new agencies and huge public works projects, all using the full power of the federal government to fix the banks, create jobs, and just restore people's faith in the system. It was the ultimate top-down solution.
But even then, at the peak of this era, some warning bells were starting to ring. President Eisenhower, the same guy who championed the interstate highway system, he cautioned everyone about the rise of a military-industrial complex. And just look at the trade-offs he laid out. It's incredibly stark. The cost of one bomber could have built over 30 schools. One single destroyer could have provided new homes for more than 8,000 families. He was asking a really tough question. With all this power, are we making the right choices?
Eisenhower's warning, it was a sign of a huge shift that was coming. That old consensus that big government was the answer, well, it started to crack. A whole new way of thinking started to bubble up.
A key voice here was the management guru Peter Drucker. Back in 1969, he made the case that government had become, in his words, sick. It was huge, sure, but it wasn't strong.
He saw it as getting tangled up in its own red tape, being way too slow to act, and losing the trust of the very people it was supposed to serve. Basically, he was saying it was a poor manager for a fast-changing world.
And then, that intellectual shift just exploded onto the political stage with this iconic line from Ronald Reagan's 1981 inaugural address. Now, that wasn't just a clever soundbite, it was the declaration of a whole new era. With those words, the pendulum started swinging hard, away from government intervention and towards the private sector as the real engine for progress.
And this new philosophy, it didn't just stay in speeches. It had very real, tangible consequences. A global privatization movement just took off. All around the world, things that had been publicly owned for decades were sold off to private companies. We're talking airlines, phone companies, power plants, even things like roads and schools. The whole idea was to let the market and consumer choice drive everything forward. But of course, the story doesn't end there. The debate wasn't just a simple choice between big government or no government. A third way started to emerge, a new philosophy that was all about reinventing government's role, not just getting rid of it.
And Peter Drucker, he's back again, and he captured this new thinking with a really brilliant analogy. He said government shouldn't try to play every single instrument in the orchestra. No, its job is to be the conductor, to set the vision, keep everyone in rhythm, and make sure all those different parts come together to create something beautiful. So the key here is that government's role shifts from doing everything to guiding and facilitating.
So this whole idea of reinventing government was built on a few core principles. First, steer, not row. That's the orchestra conductor idea. Second, empower communities to solve their own problems. Third, and this one is a real game changer, fund outcomes, not inputs. That means you pay for the result, like someone actually getting a job, not just for the hours they spent in a training program. And finally, you use competition to drive quality up and bring costs down. So this whole evolution of thinking, from government as doer to government as problem, and finally to government as conductor, that whole journey has brought us to where we are today. The future, it really seems, is all about partnership.
And this isn't just some abstract theory. Look at the Millennium Challenge Corporation, or MCC. By 2018, it had already invested over $13 billion in development projects. But the key difference is how it invests that money. It doesn't just hand out checks. It uses a competitive process and insists that the solutions have to be led by the countries themselves, focusing on what will actually kickstart local economic growth.
Now, if we compare this to another massive program, PEPFAR, the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, you start to see a common DNA emerging. Both of these programs really emphasize local ownership, working through local governments and NGOs. They're both laser-focused on performance, on measurement, and on getting results at a massive scale. This is what the modern partnership model looks like in action.
The power of this idea has become so widespread that it's now a core principle even in the most traditionally top-down places you can imagine. The U.S. National Intelligence Council has actually identified what they call multi-stakeholder multilateralism as a key driver of global power. They're arguing that future success isn't just about military spending or GDP anymore, it's about who is best at building these adaptive, integrated partnerships.
So we've traced this whole evolution, right? From a world where one entity tried to solve everything to a world today where collaboration is really the only way forward. And this brings us to one final, really crucial question. If solving our biggest challenges depends on these complex networks of businesses, nonprofits, and governments all working together, well, what does that mean for each of us? What is our individual role in this new era of partnership?
So here's a question for you. How do you take the very principles that made one of history's most successful investors and apply them to one of history's largest philanthropic gifts? That's what we're going to dig into today. We're looking at the origin story of a brand new framework for philanthropy called social value investing. And it all started with an incredible challenge to turn financial wisdom into real, lasting social good. Okay, so let's set the scene. The year is 2006. At the New York Public Library, Warren Buffett announces he's going to give away almost his entire fortune, at the time valued at a mind-blowing $44 billion, to help humanity. Now, this wasn't just a donation. It was a total shockwave that sent ripples through both the world of finance and the world of philanthropy. And that, right there, raised this huge, monumental question. I mean, think about it. In Buffett's world, success was all about how much wealth you could build, not how much you could give away. So how on earth do you take a fortune built with a very specific financial playbook and use it to create the most social good possible? You see, this moment was so much more than just a transfer of wealth. It was really a challenge. It was a challenge to see if the very same principles that built this incredible fortune could be retooled and applied to the really complex work of giving it all away effectively. It was the spark for a completely new way of thinking. All right, so to really get this new idea, we've got to go back to the original philosophy, value investing. This is the framework my grandfather, Warren Buffett, absolutely mastered. The core concept is pretty simple, actually. You find long-term investments that are basically on sale. Their real intrinsic value is way higher than their market price, and you just ignore all the crazy market hype. It's all about patience, deep analysis, and sticking to your guns. And you know what's interesting? The advice that came with the money was almost as important as the money itself. In his gift letters, Buffett really pushed the foundations to take big swings, to take risks. He got that philanthropy can go where others can't. It can tackle problems that businesses and governments won't touch. But to do that, you have to be willing to mess up, learn from it, and keep going. So, where do you test all these new ideas? Well, the main laboratory, if you will, was the Howard G. Buffett Foundation, HGBF, run by my father. That 2006 gift dropped an immense challenge right in his lap, but also an incredible opportunity to completely rethink, well, everything. And when I say transformation, I mean it was massive. Just look at these numbers. The foundation's grant-making basically exploded overnight, going from about $6 million to nearly $60 million in just 1 year. Staffing, office space, how they manage things, pretty much the whole operation had to be rebuilt from the ground up. And the focus? It shifted from smaller individual environmental gifts to these huge, complex humanitarian projects focused on things like water and food security. So, this pressure forced 3 really big shifts in how the foundation did things. First, the organizations they funded were no longer just recipients. They became true partners. Second, there was a huge new focus on local community ownership. And third, instead of funding one-off projects here and there, the foundation started funding entire portfolios of organizations that were all working together. And here's the crucial part. Without even really planning it, my father started using a playbook that looked a lot like his own father's. The foundation started acting less like a regular old charity and, a lot more like Berkshire Hathaway itself, a kind of holding company that focused on long-term value and on unlocking the hidden potential of its partners. Now, this whole new way of thinking didn't just pop up out of nowhere, fully formed. Nope, it was built piece by piece through my own journey. My experiences from my time in college, to the UN, to the White House, and even the Department of Defense, each one forged a critical part of what would eventually become the social value investing framework. So, let's walk through how all these different pieces of the puzzle came together. At Columbia, I worked on a tool to actually measure social impact. That became the performance piece. Then at the UN, working on Ted Turner's billion-dollar gift, I saw the incredible power of blending different kinds of funding into a coordinated portfolio. In the Obama White House, we figured out the best ways to build effective partnerships across different sectors. That became the process. With the Department of Defense in Afghanistan, I learned firsthand how absolutely vital community co-ownership is, which created the place element. And finally, back at my father's foundation, I saw how empowering local leaders like a man named Kofi Choboa in Ghana was the real key to success. And that became the people element. So you see, all of these different experiences, all these lessons from all over the world, they all started to click together. They formed this one single framework. It was the synthesis of value investing principles and real, on-the-ground philanthropic work, and we called it social value investing. And this is what it looks like. You've got 5 elements all connected. And what you'll notice right away is that process is right there in the middle, kind of like the hub of a wheel. It connects people, place, portfolio, and performance. The point is, these aren't just separate ideas. They're a whole system designed to work together to create social value. All right, so let's break down these 5 Ps, because this is really the heart of it. It all starts with process, building really strong partnerships across sectors, because no one organization can solve these huge problems by itself. Then you need the right people, leaders on the ground who are empowered to make decisions because they know their communities best. The work has to be rooted in a place, making sure local communities are co-owners of the solution, not just people things happen to. It's all funded through a diverse portfolio of assets, blending different kinds of money for the biggest impact. And finally, you track it all with performance, using a shared language to figure out what success actually looks like. And this is where that whole Berkshire Hathaway analogy really hits home. It becomes crystal clear when you put them side by side. Berkshire is a partnership of diverse businesses. That's the cross-sector process. It has a network of decentralized managers. Those are the empowered people. The idea of shareholders being owner-partners, that translates directly to community co-ownership of place. It's a direct, intentional translation of a wildly successful financial model into a framework for social change. And that, right there, is the big idea. Social value investing isn't just copying a business model. It is a thoughtful translation of its core principles. It takes the fundamental logic of a system designed to create financial value and adapts it to create something totally different: lasting, durable social value. So, where does this leave us? It all started with one of the largest gifts in history, right? But the idea behind it, well, that's so much bigger. It kind of asks all of us to rethink how we even define value. What if our ultimate measure of success wasn't just about what we can accumulate for ourselves, but about the sustainable, positive impact we can create and invest in together?
So imagine this. What if you could just reboot a country's entire social safety net? Plug all those little leaks of corruption and connect every single citizen, from the biggest city to the tiniest village, with one single digital key. Well, that is the absolutely staggering ambition behind Digital India.
And the scale here, it's just mind-boggling. We're not talking about a small country or a single state. The plan was to create a unique digital identity for over 1.3 billion people. To put that in perspective, that's like trying to do the same thing for the entire population of the United States 4 times over.
But this whole thing, it wasn't just about technology for the sake of technology. Nope. It was born from a really fundamental and incredibly difficult question. How on earth do you tackle systemic corruption when you're dealing with a population this massive? Right. So this digital revolution wasn't just some tech project. It was a direct response to some of India's most stubborn problems: really deep-seated poverty and this crippling kind of corruption that the government actually calls leakage. Now, when you first look at this chart, you might be a little surprised. India's score for income inequality is actually lower than the United States, and you might think, oh, so it's a more equal society. But that number hides a pretty brutal reality. See, when the baseline for everybody is much, much lower, equality can still mean extreme poverty for millions of people.
And that's really the crucial point here. Even with all the progress, you've still got over a fifth of the population. We're talking hundreds of millions of people living in extreme poverty. These are the people who need government support the most, and they were the ones being failed by the old system.
And prominent economists, well, they pointed to one major culprit: that leakage we talked about. This is basically just a word for all the waste and corruption that siphons off government benefits, things like food or fuel subsidies, before they can ever get to the people who desperately need them.
So just how big was this problem? Get this. The World Bank estimated that just one single government subsidy program was losing $1 billion a year. $1 billion, all just skimmed off the top. The challenge was obvious. How do you plug a leak that massive?
And this is where the digital revolution kicks off. Instead of trying to patch up the old, broken system, India decided to build a totally new one from the ground up. And the foundation for all of it was a project called Aadhaar.
Okay, so what exactly is Aadhaar? Well, think of it like a digital fingerprint for the entire nation. It's a free 12-digit ID number. But the number itself isn't the magic part. The real power is that it's locked to your unique biometrics, your fingerprints, your iris scans. This creates a fraud-resistant proof of who you are, designed to cut through all the old paper-based red tape.
And believe me, when they say biometric, they really mean it. The registration process is incredibly thorough. They capture not just one fingerprint, but all 10 of them, plus scans of both of your irises and a photograph. The whole goal was to create a digital identity so unique it would be almost impossible to fake.
Now, an idea this huge didn't just appear out of nowhere. It actually evolved over decades, starting with basic photo ID cards way back in the 90s. But things really kicked into high gear in 2009 when tech billionaire Nandan Nilekani was brought in to lead the project. That project later became the absolute cornerstone of the Digital India initiative.
The vision behind it all was just so powerful. As one minister put it, if previous governments built national highways out of asphalt, this government was going to build a digital highway, one that could connect every single corner of the country and deliver services directly to its citizens.
Okay, so how does this digital highway actually work in practice? Well, the government built it on a really simple but powerful three-part framework they called JAM, also known as the Digital Trinity.
The logic of JAM is actually pretty straightforward. First, the J stands for Jandan. Get everyone a basic bank account. Bring them into the formal economy. Next, the A is for Aadhaar. Link that new bank account to their unique digital ID to prove who they are. And finally, the M is for mobile. Use India's massive mobile phone network as a final pipeline to deliver services and money directly into people's hands. Simple, right?
And the rollout? Wow, it was completely unprecedented. Just look at these numbers. By 2018, more than 1.2 billion Aadhaar IDs were issued. The country had over 1 billion mobile subscribers. And hundreds of millions of brand new bank accounts were opened. In less than a decade, that digital highway had actually been built.
But, building the highway is one thing. What happens when people actually start using it? Well, the impact was felt most deeply in two absolutely critical areas: people's money and their health.
Remember that billion-dollar leakage problem we talked about? Well, the potential savings from fixing it were just enormous. One study estimated that if all government subsidies moved to this new direct transfer system, it could save the government over $11 billion every single year.
The difference was literally night and day. Before, a subsidized can of cooking gas could have its value skimmed off by middlemen. Sometimes up to 40% would just leak out. Now, the government just deposits the cash value of that subsidy directly into a person's verified bank account. The middleman is just gone.
But this digital highway was designed for a lot more than just sending money around. It also opened the door for some revolutionary new ways to deliver essential services, like healthcare, to the most remote parts of the country.
For instance, a partnership with Apollo Hospitals uses this new digital infrastructure to offer telemedicine. For just 100 rupees, that's about $1.60, someone in a remote village can have a video call with a top doctor who's hundreds of miles away. I mean, that's a total game changer.
Of course, a project this massive, this ambitious, doesn't happen without some pretty major challenges. When you're building a digital highway for 1 billion people, you're going to hit some very real and very serious bumps in the road. This quote from the project's own director just perfectly captures the problem of scale. He said that even with an incredible accuracy rate of 99.99%, well, 0.01% of 1.2 billion is still over 100,000 people. When you're dealing with numbers this big, even tiny errors can have huge consequences.
And the concerns that have been raised are profound. Critics point to the immense potential for government surveillance. The security risk is almost unimaginable. A database with 1 billion people's info is one of the biggest targets for hackers on the planet. And what about exclusion? For the system to work, it has to work for everyone. But what happens to a manual laborer whose fingerprints have worn away? Or someone who's homeless and has no fixed address? These aren't just technical glitches, they're fundamental questions about who gets left behind.
Which really leaves us with the huge question at the very heart of this revolution. Is a system like this, a universal, biometrically linked ID for every single citizen, ultimately a tool for empowerment that lifts people out of poverty, or is it a tool for unprecedented government control? The truth is probably somewhere in the middle, and it's a question that every country exploring these new digital frontiers is going to have to face.
Some problems are just huge. Think about it. Climate change, global health crises, systemic poverty. These aren't challenges that any single group can solve on its own. Not a government, not a company, not a nonprofit. They absolutely demand that different groups that often have totally different goals, find a way to work together. And that, as you can imagine, is incredibly difficult.
This quote from Warren Buffett just nails the core challenge, doesn't it? A business looks at a spreadsheet and measures success in profit and loss. A government might be looking at approval ratings or how many people they've served. And a philanthropy? They're looking at long-term systemic impact. They're all speaking completely different languages. So, that's the big question, isn't it? That's what we're going to dig into. You need a blueprint, a really clear, deliberate plan that shows every single person where their piece fits into the larger structure. Today, we're going to walk through that very architect's blueprint for building cross-sector partnerships that actually work, and, more importantly, that last. Okay, so before any architect can even think about building, they have to understand their materials, right? So first things first, what exactly is a cross-sector partnership? Now, that term gets thrown around a lot, but for our blueprint, it has a very specific, very solid definition.
A true partnership is really built on 6 key pillars. First, it has to be voluntary. Everyone's at the table because they choose to be. Second, it's a true collaboration, not just a simple contract for services. It's about co-designing from the ground up. Third, it leverages the expertise of different teams. Fourth, it pools all kinds of resources. We're talking way more than just money. And then you have the 2 most crucial pillars, the ones that really hold the whole thing up. The goals have to be mutually agreed upon, and they have to be measurable. Without those last 2, the entire structure is just, well, it's not going to stand for long.
So with our cornerstone firmly in place, it's time for the next big step in our blueprint. We've got to assemble the team and choose a structural design. I mean, every successful project depends on having the right people in the right roles and picking a model that actually fits the job at hand.
In pretty much every cross-sector partnership, you're going to find 3 primary roles. You've got your funders. These are the governments or foundations putting up the capital. You've got the implementers, the NGOs or companies on the ground actually doing the work. And then you have the stakeholders. These are the local communities who are most affected by the outcome. Let's take that Apollo Telemedicine project in India. Super clear example. The government was the funder, the company Apollo was the implementer, and the local village residents, they were the key stakeholders.
Now, these players can set up their work in a few different ways. The most straightforward model is probably joint programming. This is where, say, a food bank and a local health clinic realize they're both running nutrition programs. So they combine them. It cuts down on waste, they reach more people. It's all about efficiency.
And building on that, sometimes the joint program becomes so successful that it actually outgrows its parent organizations. That's when you see something called an independent spinoff. The original partners basically create a brand new, separate organization just to run the program. This lets it grow on its own while they can stay focused on their own core missions.
Then, for massive scale, you've got a totally different model, the formal confederation. You can think of something like the United Nations here. You have a big umbrella group that coordinates everything and provides shared services for a whole network of independent members. This is how you get huge, coordinated action on a really complex issue.
Okay, you've got your foundation, you've got your team, and you've got a structural design. But a blueprint isn't just a rough sketch, is it? It needs detailed instructions. For that, our architect has 2 absolutely indispensable tools that turn a good idea into a great building.
The first tool is called the theory of change. And what makes it so critical is that it forces you to start at the end. I mean it. You first define the ultimate impact you want to create, and then you work backward, step by step, to map out everything you need, the outcomes, the outputs, the activities, the inputs, to get there. It's a logical chain that connects every single thing you do directly to your final goal.
And here's what that looks like in the real world. For the Apollo Telemedicine partnership, the ultimate impact was simple: a healthier India. So working backward, they identify the outcomes needed for that, like lower healthcare costs and thriving communities. Those outcomes would come from the outputs of 60,000 new clinics, which require the activities of training and operations, all powered by the inputs of government funding and medical expertise. You see, every single piece is connected.
The second tool is the value chain analysis. Now, if the theory of change is the blueprint for your building, the value chain is the map of the entire city it sits in. It forces you to look beyond your own program and analyze the whole system, supply chains, market forces, regulations, to spot potential roadblocks that you would have never seen otherwise.
This agricultural project is a perfect example of why this is so critical. Imagine this: an NGO gives farmers better seeds and fertilizer, and wow, crop yields just skyrocket. The program looks like a huge success, right? But the value chain analysis asks, what happens next? If there are no trucks to get those crops to a market, or no one there to buy them, the whole system just breaks down. That initial success means absolutely nothing. This tool helps you see and fix those breaks before they happen.
So, we've laid the foundation, we've picked a structure, and we've used our most precise tools to plan every single detail. This whole process moves us away from some vague idea of working together to a concrete, actionable architectural plan.
And honestly, this is the bottom line. This blueprint, having a clear definition, the right structure, and those rigorous planning tools like a theory of change and a value chain analysis, this is not just some academic exercise. It is the fundamental difference between a partnership that looks good in a press release for a year and one that actually builds something that creates real, lasting change. This kind of structured approach gives us the framework to tackle society's most complex challenges, to turn good intentions into measurable, sustainable impact. So now you have the blueprint. The only question left is, what will you build?
You know, it's a story we've seen in cities all over the world. An iconic public space, the very heart of a city, just falls into ruin. But what does it actually take to bring it back from the brink? Today, we're diving into the incredible playbook that didn't just save one famous park, but created a model for urban miracles. I mean, this single image says it all, doesn't it? On the left, that's Belvedere Castle as it was, covered in graffiti, wrapped in razor wire, literally crumbling. And on the right, the landmark we know and love today. This wasn't just a simple renovation, it was a total resurrection.
So the big question is, how does this happen? How does a place go from being a dangerous, ugly mess to a vibrant masterpiece? Well, the answer involves a massive financial crisis, a few incredibly stubborn visionaries, and a radical new idea that completely changed how we think about public spaces.
Okay, so to really get the comeback story, first you have to understand just how unbelievably bad things got. By the middle of the 20th century, Central Park had become a symbol of everything that was going wrong. You see, the decline wasn't sudden. It was a slow burn. After its original designers left way back in the 1880s, the park just slowly withered. Sure, there was a brief, powerful fix-up under Robert Moses in the 30s, but after he left in 1960, 2 decades of really bad neglect kicked in. And the final nail in the coffin? That was New York's fiscal crisis in the 1970s, which slashed budgets for pretty much everything, especially parks.
The result was, well, this. The Great Lawn wasn't a lawn at all. People nicknamed it the Great Dust Bowl. A combination of heavy use, clogged drains, and absolutely zero maintenance turned the park's vibrant center into this barren wasteland. It was a powerful, depressing symbol for a city in decline.
The man who would eventually lead the park's restoration, Doug Blonsky, described it like this. It's just such a visceral image of total collapse. This wasn't just neglect, it was an environment that was actively hostile and decaying.
And the park's condition was really just a mirror of the city itself. In 1990, New York hit an all-time record for murders. The fear wasn't just in the park was a symptom of a citywide crisis of safety and order. It was a dangerous place in a very dangerous city.
But you know, it's often at the lowest point that the most innovative ideas start to emerge. And faced with a bankrupt city and a totally ruined park, a new way forward was born out of sheer necessity.
The big idea was something called a cross-sector partnership. Now, I know it sounds a little bit like corporate jargon, but it's a really powerful concept. It basically means the government wouldn't try to go it alone. Instead, it would formally partner up with a private, nonprofit group and the community to save the park together.
Of course, an idea like this needs people to make it happen. You had Parks Commissioner Gordon Davis, who knew the old way just wasn't working. He hired Betsy Rogers, who is described as a zealous nut for the park, as its first ever administrator. And then, just a year later, Rogers co-founded the Central Park Conservancy, the nonprofit engine that would drive this whole incredible change.
This quote from Betsy Rogers really captures the entire spirit of the movement. See, instead of fighting City Hall, she wanted to partner with it. This philosophy of collaboration, not confrontation, was the absolute key to making the whole thing work.
So with this new philosophy and this new structure in place, the seemingly impossible work of redemption could finally begin, piece by painstaking piece.
And their strategy was just brilliant. They started small, using private donations for little, visible fixes to build momentum and show people things were changing. Then came the masterstroke. They used private money to design what they called shovel-ready projects. That way, when the city suddenly found some extra cash at the end of the year, the Conservancy was right there, plans in hand, ready to go immediately. Super smart.
And this is the result. Remember the Great Dust Bowl? This is what that playbook achieved. A complete transformation from a symbol of decay into a symbol of hope and rebirth, all funded by that clever combination of public and private money and orchestrated by the partnership. And the scale of this private effort is just immense. Since 1980, the Central Park Conservancy has invested nearly $1 billion of privately raised money into this public park. Just think about that.
But get this, the return on that investment is even more remarkable. The restored park now generates over $1.4 billion in economic activity and tax revenue for the city every single year. It just goes to show, this isn't just a park, it's a powerful economic engine.
Now, the really cool part is that the success in Central Park wasn't some one-off miracle. The playbook was so effective, it was used to create something even more audacious, something that came seemingly from nothing. Meet Joshua, David, and Robert Hammond. Back in 1999, they were just two regular guys living in a neighborhood, looking up at this, a derelict, elevated railway on Manhattan's west side that was scheduled to be demolished. Their mission seemed completely impossible, right? But they had a blueprint. They explicitly modeled their organization, the Friends of the High Line, on the Central Park Conservancy. The plan was the same: partner with the city to turn this industrial relic into a public park. And the result is just as dramatic. From an overgrown, ugly piece of industrial junk to one of the most unique and beloved urban parks in the entire world, the Central Park playbook had worked its magic again.
The economic impact was, once again, staggering. The city estimated the High Line spurred over $2 billion in new private development around it. It created this halo effect that completely revitalized the whole neighborhood.
So what's the big takeaway from these two incredible stories? Well, it's that this isn't just about parks. It's about a new way for cities to solve what seem like impossible problems.
So here it is, the recipe for success. Really, it all starts with visionary leaders who choose collaboration over conflict. It needs a formal partnership structure, a mix of public and private money, and deep, deep roots in the community. It's just a powerful formula for urban renewal. And that really leaves us with a final thought. From a dangerous Central Park to an abandoned railway, this playbook turned massive liabilities into world-class assets. So the question is, what forgotten, derelict, or impossible space in your city is just waiting for its own partnership to bring it back to life?
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're digging into something really powerful, the people framework. Think of it as a playbook for building partnerships that can tackle the kinds of huge problems no single organization could ever solve on its own.
I mean, seriously, think about it. When you're facing these massive, complex challenges, things like urban decay or even climate change, it can feel completely overwhelming. It's just, where would you even begin? While the answer isn't about finding one single hero to save the day, it's about building a network. And that's the whole idea behind a cross-sector partnership, bringing totally different worlds together to work on one shared goal.
Now, to make this idea really stick, let's talk about the incredible turnaround of Central Park. Back in the 70s, it was a mess, a symbol of a city in decline. But a really unique collaboration between the city, regular citizens, and nonprofits didn't just save it, they turned it into the icon it is today. That story is going to be our guide here.
Okay, so what's the secret sauce to making these partnerships actually work? Well, it starts with a pretty radical shift in how we think about leadership. It's all about letting go of that old-school top-down control. It's called decentralized leadership. So instead of a rigid pyramid structure, I want you to picture a flexible network. Every partner is an expert in their own field, and they're empowered to make their own calls. Your job as a leader isn't to micromanage everyone. It's to coordinate this incredible team of all-stars. You see, this whole framework is built on balancing three key things: people, place, and process. They're all super important, of course, but for right now, we're zeroing in on the people piece. This is the real art of leading a coordinated, decentralized team. So you might be thinking, why go through all the trouble? It sounds complicated, but it's simple because it gets results. This approach just unleashes so much creativity. You get all these different viewpoints focused on the same problem, which gives you the flexibility you absolutely need to solve these messy, complex issues. All right, so if you're going to build one of these powerful networks, who actually needs to be a part of it? Let's break down the different kinds of partners that make up these incredible super teams. Each type of partner brings its own unique superpower to the table, right? You got the public sector. They have the authority, the policy power. Then there's the private sector, bringing that business savvy and access to capital. Philanthropy can offer that flexible, risk-tolerant funding that's so hard to get. And then, crucially, you have the nonprofits with their on-the-ground experience and community trust. The real magic happens when you get all of those strengths working together. Okay, so you've got the right organizations at the table.
But let's be real, a great team is so much more than just a bunch of logos on a slide. You need the right people with the right skills leading the charge.
And it turns out there are 5 core leadership skills that are absolutely essential for any of these partnerships to succeed. It's helpful to think of them as archetypes, different roles you need to have filled on your team. Let's walk through them.
First up, you've got the thought leader. This is your deep expert, the person who just gets the problem inside and out. They provide that critical expertise to guide the strategy and make sure you're always heading in the right direction.
Next, you absolutely need the advocate. This leader is the voice for a specific community. They make sure that the people who are most affected by the problem actually have a seat at the table and that their needs are front and center in whatever solution you come up with.
Third on our list is the deal maker. You cannot succeed without this person. They live and breathe negotiations, funding, and resources. They're the ones who secure the money and structure the agreements that keep the whole engine running. And of course, you need the visionary. This is your storyteller in chief. They're the one who paints this compelling, exciting picture of the future that gets everyone fired up and keeps them pushing forward, especially when things get tough.
And last but definitely not least, you need the implementer. This leader is a master of logistics and process. They take the visionary's grand ideas and break them down into a concrete step-by-step plan. They coordinate all the moving parts to make it actually happen.
So, you've assembled your dream team. You've got all the right skills in the room. Now what? What do you actually do? This is where the playbook comes in. How you build momentum, and just as important, how you keep it going.
This quote here, about Betsy Rogers, who is one of the key leaders in saving Central Park, just perfectly captures that visionary role we were talking about. See, it shows that leadership isn't just about managing a to-do list. It's about shaping a culture and creating a vision that everyone can rally behind.
The foundation for all of this is a strong team identity. This isn't just fluffy, feel-good stuff. This is the emotional glue that holds the whole partnership together. A great leader has to build this on purpose, by defining shared beliefs and values, creating little rituals to celebrate wins, and building loyalty through powerful shared experiences.
So where do you begin? First, you have to light a fire, create a real sense of urgency, a reason why this has to happen now. Then you build your coalition of supporters. Next, you have to communicate the vision over and over and over again. And finally, a huge part of your job is just to clear the path, get the roadblocks out of the way so your team can do their best work.
But getting off to a great start isn't enough, right? This is a marathon, not a sprint. To keep that momentum going, you have to celebrate every single win, big or small. You need to anchor that progress by building new processes. You've got to craft a compelling new story about what you're doing. And you always have to make sure that the big vision still connects with the team's core identity.
Okay, we have covered a lot of ground. We've talked about the leadership style, the team you need, and the playbook to make it all work. But what does it really all boil down to? What's the fundamental job of a leader in this kind of setup?
It really comes down to these 3 powerful words. Your job is to convene, to bring the right people to the table. Then you coordinate. You help their different skills and talents work together in harmony. And finally, you catalyze their effort. You spark the action that leads to real, lasting change. Convene, coordinate, catalyze. That's the core of it.
And that right there is the people framework. It's so much more than just a theory. It's really a call to action. So the final question I have is for you. As you look at your own community or your own field, what partnership could you build to make a difference?
All right, let's set the scene. It's 2009. We're in Afghanistan, right in the middle of a really complex conflict. But here's the twist. The U.S. Department of Defense decides to try something completely different. Not just your typical military strategy. And that really gets to the core question they were asking. In a place that's known decades of fighting, what could possibly create real, lasting stability? And the answer, you'll see, is probably not what you're thinking. For thousands of Afghan farmers and their families, it turns out the most powerful weapon wasn't a weapon at all. It was the chance to make a living. See, there was this new counterinsurgency guide, and the whole strategy shifted to focus on agriculture as a way to build peace from the ground up. Now, to really get why this farming-first strategy made so much sense, we have to look at the massive problem the DoD's economic team found in Herat province. This wasn't just about the fighting. It was about basic survival. A survey back in 2009 asked Afghans what they thought was driving the conflict, and the answer was honestly stunning. A full 70% didn't point to politics or ideology. Nope. They said the real issue was poverty and the fact that there were no jobs. And we're not talking about a small problem here. This unemployment was extreme. In rural Herat, the whole economy basically shut down in the winter after the harvest. I mean, can you even imagine? Unemployment could shoot up to 90%. 90. The entire community had almost no way to earn money for months on end. And this created this deep, crushing poverty. It's estimated that almost half of the people in rural areas were trying to get by on less than $2 a day. Think about that for a second. Less than you'd pay for a bottle of water. So you see what was happening, right? It was this terrible, vicious cycle. People were desperate because they couldn't find work or feed their families, and that desperation fueled instability. But then, of course, the instability would just wreck the economy even more, a total feedback loop. So breaking a cycle like that, it meant you needed a totally different playbook. It meant looking past the military side of things and getting right to the economic heart of the problem. And this wasn't some wild maverick idea. It was actually official U.S. doctrine. The government's own counterinsurgency guide said it flat out. The most effective tools are often non-military. The military's job was to provide a security bubble, basically, so that economic development could actually happen. The whole philosophy behind this was called social value investing. Now, this is important. This isn't your typical foreign aid handout. The whole idea was to treat the people of Herat as partners, as co-owners and shareholders who had a real stake in the outcome. And they built it around 3 simple, really powerful ideas. First, you get the right people. We're talking world-class agricultural experts. Second, you create the right process. Not just a bunch of separate little projects, but one big, holistic plan that tackles the whole system. And third, and this is the absolute key, you focus on place. You make sure the local communities are in the driver's seat, that they own this thing. So what did this team of experts actually find on the ground? Well, the issue in Herat wasn't that people didn't know how to farm. I mean, it's an agricultural society. The problem was that the entire system, what we call the agricultural value chain, was completely broken. Okay, take a look at this. It might seem complicated, but the big idea here is that farming is like a chain. It's got all these links. And in Herat, so many of those links were just shattered. You might be able to grow something, but then there's nowhere to process it. Or you have produce, but no good way to sell it. The goal was to go in and fix every single broken link in that chain. So to do that, they came up with 4 big projects that all fit together like puzzle pieces. They targeted modern irrigation, building food processing centers, organizing farmers into groups called cooperatives, and even investing in the local university. The real genius was how each project supported all the others. So let's start with production. The old way of watering crops, flood irrigation, was super wasteful. You'd lose half the water. But by bringing in modern center pivot irrigation, the water efficiency shot up to almost 98%. That one change meant farmers could grow way more food with less water and sometimes even get a second harvest in a single year, a total game changer. But tech and strategy, that's only half of it. The real test is what it all means for actual people. Let's look at the impact on the ground in Herat. And this right here says it all. You can see the human side of this transformation. Before, women were processing food at home, small scale, not very efficient. But then, by building these modern processing centers and helping organize the women into their own businesses, these cooperatives, you get this, a thriving local market. It meant steady jobs, it meant less food went to waste, and it meant a stable food supply for the whole community. And this isn't just some abstract concept. Let me tell you about Zainab Sufazada. She was one of the women who went from processing food at home to leading one of these new centers. And just 1 year later, 1 year, she was named the best commercial farmer in the entire province. That's what opportunity looks like. And to make sure this all lasted, the team invested in knowledge. For years, the agriculture school at Herat University was just an empty, unfinished building. This project finished it, turning it into a real hub for research and education, a place to train the next generation of Afghanistan's agricultural leaders. So when you piece all of this together, you can actually see a clear pattern emerge. It's almost like they found a formula for creating stability. This table just lays it out so clearly. You see how every single problem had a specific, targeted solution. Needed to help farmers? Center pivot irrigation. Needed to fix the broken value chain? Women's food processing centers. Needed jobs? The cooperatives. And what holds it all together for the future? That investment in the university. It's a complete system. So, what are the big takeaways here? Well, the lessons are huge. First, tackling the whole system is way better than just funding a bunch of small, separate projects. Second, local ownership isn't just a nice-to-have, it's absolutely critical for success. Third, you need partnerships between everyone, the military, civilians, nonprofits. And maybe the biggest lesson of all, going after the root economic causes of a conflict can be one of the most powerful ways to build peace. And that leaves us with one final, really big question to think about. The story of what happened in Herat suggests that when people have jobs, when they have security and hope, stability can actually take root. It challenges us to think about conflict in a new way and to ask ourselves, what if the best path to peace isn't paved with weapons, but with work?
You ever see a shiny new community center get built only for it to sit empty? Or a big, well-funded project just fizzle out? It happens way more than you'd think. We see millions of dollars spent trying to improve communities, but so often these efforts just don't stick. Well, today, we're going to dive into a framework that's designed to fix that exact problem.
I mean, this is the big question, right? It's usually not because of a lack of money. And it's almost never because people didn't have good intentions. So what's the missing piece of the puzzle? Well, it turns out the answer is all about how these projects get off the ground in the first place.
And that's the real head-scratcher. You see foundations and governments pouring all these resources into projects that are supposed to do good, but the results just fall flat. It really points to something deeper, a fundamental flaw in the way we've traditionally approached community development.
All right, so let's pull back the curtain on that traditional model and see where things go wrong. It's often called the top-down approach, and yeah, it might look efficient on paper, but it is just packed with hidden problems.
This slide really lays it all out. On the left, you've got that classic top-down model. It's basically a pyramid, with the funders way up at the top calling all the shots. But on the right, you see the place-based approach. It's not a pyramid at all. It's a circle. It's all about partnership and shared ownership.
So that top-down model, it's practically a recipe for failure. When funders are in total control, their goals can completely miss what a community actually wants or needs. They might ignore local customs or totally misdiagnose the root of the problem. And this doesn't just lead to bad projects. It can actually make people in the community feel powerless and even create resistance to the very help being offered.
Okay, so that brings us to the solution, the place framework. And this is a totally different way of thinking about how we invest in communities. It's built from the ground up to be collaborative, to be inclusive, and most importantly, to actually work for the long haul.
So what in the world is a place-based initiative? Well, it's a strategy that focuses everyone's energy and resources on one specific area, like a neighborhood. But the real magic isn't just about the money. It's about getting all the key players, the funders, the folks doing the work, and the people who actually live there all around the same table to design solutions together.
This quote right here, it gets to the absolute heart of the matter. This isn't about charity. It's about co-investment. When you start treating community members like shareholders, like actual co-owners, they have real skin in the game. And that builds trust, it encourages everyone to work together, and it makes sure the project can survive long after the initial funding runs out.
So how do you actually do that? How do you make this big mindset shift happen? Well, the place framework is built on 6 core principles that basically guide how everyone works together. You can think of them as the rules of engagement for a truly successful partnership. And here they are. You've got everything from inclusive engagement, which means getting everyone to the table from day one, to mutual accountability, which makes sure everyone has a stake in the outcome. These principles create a space where people can talk openly, where progress is actually celebrated, and where decisions are made together, not just handed down from on high. Okay, principles are great, but talk is cheap, right? How do you actually put them into practice? This is where the framework gets really practical. It provides a toolkit, a set of simple, shared tools that help all the partners turn these big ideas into real, concrete plans.
The first tool is called the scoping chart. It's a super simple but powerful way to get everyone looking at the same map. So the vertical axis, going up and down, shows the scale of a project. Is it for one neighborhood or a whole region? And the horizontal axis, going side to side, shows the timeline. Is it a quick win or a long-term investment?
And here's what it looks like in the real world. This is an example from a project in Afghanistan. See, down in the bottom left, you have things like a short-term school feeding program. Then, way up in the top right, you have a huge long-term investment like a university research lab. This one chart instantly shows how all the different pieces of the puzzle are supposed to fit together. Now, the second tool takes it a step further. It's called the impact balance sheet. And this is basically a system that lets everybody, funders, implementers, and community members, score different project ideas based on priorities that they all agreed on together.
Okay, and this is where it gets really cool. The data from that impact balance sheet gets mapped right back onto the scoping chart we just saw. So now you're adding these rich new layers of information, which makes the whole decision-making process transparent for everyone involved.
So what are these new layers telling everybody? It's actually pretty simple. The size of each circle shows how much a project costs. Bigger circle, bigger price tag. And the shade of the circle shows you the risk. Lighter circles are low risk, easy wins. The darker circles, those are the high risk, high reward projects. All of a sudden, everyone in the room can see the entire strategic landscape in a single glance.
So when you combine these principles and tools, you create a system for a real partnership. But for it to actually work, every single partner has to step up and own their specific role. This creates that mutual accountability we talked about, where everyone knows what their job is.
For the funder, their job completely changes. In the old model, they were the boss. Here, they're more like a coach or a facilitator. Instead of giving orders, their job is to invest in people, help everyone communicate, and offer guidance. They use their power to empower others, not to control them.
Then you have the implementers. These are the folks on the ground, the NGOs or contractors doing the work. They are the crucial link in the chain, the bridge between the community and the funder. And their job isn't just to report back to the boss. It's to create a constant two-way conversation, making sure the community's voice is always heard.
And finally, the stakeholders, the community members themselves. In the old model, they were often just seen as people receiving aid. But here, their role is active. They are true partners who bring the most valuable thing to the table. Local knowledge. The history, the culture, the stuff that no outsider could ever fully get. They are the experts on their own community. Period.
Ultimately, what this all boils down to is the simple truth. When you're trying to solve the really messy, complex problems our communities face, cooperation isn't just a nice-to-have. It's an absolute necessity. It's the only way to create solutions that are not only effective, but also fair and built to last.
So I'll leave you with this question to think about. Picture your own community, where you live. What are the big challenges it's facing? And just imagine how things might be different if every project treated the people there not as passive recipients, but as true co-owners of their own future.
So what happens when the very systems that are supposed to serve you completely break down? You know, when trust in government just hits rock bottom? Well, in Brazil, a group of corporate leaders looked at this exact crisis, and instead of just walking away, they actually stepped in. They used their own money and their own expertise to try and rebuild the very foundations of public service.
But look, before we get to the solution, you really have to understand the scale of the problem. And in Brazil, this wasn't just a few cracks in the foundation. We're talking about the entire structure of governance, and it was crumbling.
So what does a truly broken system actually feel like for the people who are living in it? I mean, it is so much more than just frustrating wait times. I want you to imagine a bureaucratic maze so dense, so complicated, that it's actively strangling new businesses and just draining the life out of its citizens.
Okay, here is a number that says it all. 2,600. A study by PricewaterhouseCoopers found that's how many hours the average business in Brazil spent per year just on tax compliance. That's not time spent growing or innovating. Nope. That's just time spent trying to follow the rules.
And to put that number into perspective, just take a look at this. 2,600 hours isn't just high. It's nearly 10 times the world average. I mean, out of 189 economies, Brazil's tax system was, by a massive margin, the most complex and time-consuming in the entire world. It's just staggering.
And this soul-crushing bureaucracy, it wasn't happening in a vacuum. No, it was going on alongside a failing economy and these absolutely explosive corruption scandals. So millions of Brazilians, they took to the streets. They were completely fed up with paying high taxes for services they just weren't getting.
But you know, it's often in these moments of deep, deep crisis that the most radical solutions start to emerge. And the group that stepped up to offer one, well, it was probably the last group anyone expected.
So way back in 2000, some of Brazil's most successful corporate leaders did something pretty unusual. They looked at the country's failing government and they saw it not just as a social problem, but as a business problem. They realized that poor governance was holding everyone back, so they formed a nonprofit, Comunitas, to do one thing: bring private sector efficiency to public sector chaos.
And by 2012, this all led to their flagship program, Juntos, which of course means together. The whole concept was both simple and, honestly, revolutionary. They wanted to use private, philanthropic money to partner directly with city governments, bringing in elite expertise to make them more efficient, more transparent, and more accountable to the people they serve.
So here's how the Juntos model works, in 4 pretty clear steps. First, they find newly elected mayors who are genuinely committed to reform. Second, they provide the funding for top-tier consultants. We're talking experts most cities could never afford on their own. Third, and this part is absolutely crucial, they absorb the financial risk. If a new idea fails, public money isn't wasted. And finally, they co-design solutions with city staff to make sure the changes actually stick around.
Of course, a model is just a theory until it meets the real world. And the first major test for Juntos came in the city of Campinas, a place that was notorious for its deep-rooted problems.
Campinas was the poster child for dysfunction. It was bleeding money, it was suffocating in red tape, and it was so corrupt that a former mayor had actually been arrested. Then, in 2013, a new, reform-minded mayor, Jonas Donizete, saw Juntos as the exact partner he needed to turn things around.
So, their first target was the building permit process. Before Juntos getting a permit was a total nightmare. It involved 11 different agencies and took over 3 months on average. The Juntos-funded team helped create a new online system for self-certification. And the result? Approval times plummeted from months to just a few days. Wow!
But fixing the bureaucracy was really only half the battle. They also had to rebuild trust. And to do that, the team introduced a digital platform called Collab, which was designed to reconnect the citizens of Campinas directly with their government. The Collab app gave citizens a real voice. They could instantly report problems like potholes, they could propose new ideas for the city, and they could actually help set priorities. This wasn't just some digital suggestion box, it was a powerful tool for civic participation, and pretty soon, over 9,000 residents were actively using it.
So, the big question was Campinas just a one-time success, a lucky break, or could this model actually be replicated? Well, Juntos was determined to prove their approach was scalable.
Their next partner was the city of Pelotas, and this time a totally different challenge: public healthcare. But the Juntos playbook? It remained exactly the same. Bring in outside expertise and start by asking the citizens what they actually needed.
And the result was this new kind of health clinic, designed with direct input from the community. It had a community garden, an educational kitchen, even exercise spaces. Now, the city could only cover 15% of the cost, so Juntos stepped in and provided the other 85%, completely removing the financial risk for the city and turning this ambitious idea into a reality.
And the model proved to be really flexible. In Curitiba, a city that's already famous for its amazing urban design, Juntos didn't focus on basic services. Instead, they helped the government create a new digital platform to get the public re-engaged in long-term strategic planning for the city's future.
So, after years of work in all these different cities across Brazil, did the model actually work? Well, let's just say the results speak for themselves.
First, let's look at the political impact. In the 2016 elections, mayors who partnered with Juntos were twice as likely to be re-elected as the national average. Voters were clearly seeing the improvements, and they were rewarding the leaders who delivered them.
And then there's the financial return on investment. For every single dollar that Juntos invested, their partner cities gained $10 back through cost savings or new revenue. That is a staggering 10x return on investment simply by making government work better.
So the Juntos advantage is crystal clear. It uses private money to de-risk public innovation. It injects modern skills into government. It builds public trust through transparency. And maybe most importantly, it offers a proven, scalable blueprint for better governance.
And all of this really just leads to one final question. This unique partnership, it transforms cities all across Brazil. It just makes you wonder, what problems in your own city could be solved if a new partnership like this came together?
All right, let's get into it. Today, we're going to unpack a really powerful idea that's making so-called impossible investments, well, possible. It's called blended finance, and it's a whole new way of thinking about how we fund solutions to the world's toughest problems. So let's dive in. But first, let's ask a really fundamental question. From climate change to global poverty, why is it so incredibly hard to get money flowing to the projects that seem to need it the most? Well, it turns out it often comes down to a classic standoff between two very different worlds of money. And that conflict? It creates what you could call the investment deadlock. It's that frustrating place where you have well-intentioned investors on one side and mission-driven charities on the other. They both want to solve the problem, but their financial rule books just keep them apart. So, picture this. On one side, you've got private investors. They're looking at these social projects and thinking, way too risky for the kind of financial return I'm looking for. And then on the other side, you have charities and foundations. They have the mission, they have the heart, but their grants alone just don't have the firepower to tackle the problem at scale. So they're both kind of stuck, right? Playing by totally different rule books. Okay, so to really get why they're stuck, we've got to look at the traditional rules they're playing by. We need to examine the old financial map that's been guiding mainstream investment for decades. And the main compass on that map, it's something called modern portfolio theory. Now, it's a brilliant framework, came about in the 1950s, and it helps investors balance their portfolios. But, and this is the key takeaway, its entire focus is on the trade-off between financial risk and financial return. Things like social impact, they're just not part of the original equation. This chart right here, it illustrates that idea perfectly. See that curved line? That's called the efficient frontier, and that's where every traditional investor wants to be. It represents the best possible financial return you can get for a certain level of risk. So, any project that lands below that line, well, in the traditional view, it's considered suboptimal. And you know what that means? It gets a hard pass. So if the old map doesn't lead us to these really important investments, what's the solution? Well, this is where things get really interesting. The answer isn't to just work harder with the same old tools. Nope. It's to change the rules of the game entirely. And how do you do that? You bring in a new player, a real game changer, philanthropic capital. This is the money from foundations, from donors. And what's special about it? It's patient, it's flexible, and this is the big one, it's not just chasing financial returns, it's chasing a mission. And look what happens when you do that. This is so cool. That new player literally redraws the map. When you strategically blend that philanthropic money into a deal, you can lower the risk for private investors, or you can sweeten the return. And just like that, those projects we talked about, A, B, and C, the ones that were suboptimal before, poof, they jump right up onto a new efficient frontier. They become not just possible, but actually attractive investments. There's a quote from the source material that just nails this idea. See, the point isn't for philanthropy to do all the heavy lifting and carry a project all the way to the top. No, its job is to build those first few crucial rungs on the ladder. It makes the climb possible so that private investment and the market can come in and take it the rest of the way. So let's talk about how this actually works. This brings us to the philanthropic toolkit. And trust me, this is way more sophisticated than just writing a big check. Just take a look at this spectrum here. Over on the far left, you've got your traditional grants. You give the money away. No expectation of getting it back financially. But as you start moving to the right, you see all these other tools pop up. Low-interest loans, loan guarantees, even taking an equity stake. It's this flexibility, this whole range of options that is the real superpower of blended finance. Okay, so one of the most powerful tools in that toolkit is something called a program-related investment, or PRI for short. So in the US, there's a rule that foundations have to give away 5% of their assets to charity every single year. What a PRI does is pretty clever. It lets them meet that 5% rule, but instead of a simple grant that's gone forever, they can make an investment, say a low-interest loan, that directly helps their mission. And the best part? That money can eventually come back to be used again. And if you want a fantastic real-world example of this in action, look no further than the Grameen Bank. So the Ford Foundation started out helping them with a basic grant. But the magic moment, the real turning point, was in 1981. They didn't give a grant, they gave a loan guarantee. And what did that do? That single move basically took the risk off the table for the big commercial banks, giving them the confidence to lend to the program. The rest, as they say, is history. Grameen Bank became a global pioneer and won the Nobel Peace Prize, all kickstarted by one clever piece of blended finance. All right, another really cool tool is the Social Impact Bond, or SIB. Now, it sounds a little complicated, but the idea behind it is brilliant. Here's how it works. Step 1, private investors put up the cash to fund a social program. Then the program runs. And here's the kicker. If and only if the program actually works and saves the government money, the government takes a piece of those savings and pays the investors back, sometimes with a little extra. The bottom line, the financial risk gets shifted from you, the taxpayer, to the investors. Now, I gotta be clear, this is still pretty new stuff, and it doesn't always work out. Take the really high-profile case at Rikers Island in New York. The program there just didn't hit its targets, so the investors, they didn't get their money back. But, and this is so important, the taxpayers didn't lose a single penny. But then you look at a similar SIB over in the UK. That one was a huge success. It worked, it reduced reoffending rates, and the investors got paid. So you can see both sides of the coin here, right? There's real risk, but also incredible promise. Okay, so let's pull all these threads together. Why is this idea of blending capital such a big deal? Why does it change everything? Well, at the end of the day, it's about unlocking a tremendous amount of social value that's been trapped in the system. The power of this whole approach really boils down to 4 key advantages. First, it totally widens the definition of what a good investment can even be. Second, it pulls everyone to the table, government, private companies, charities, and builds a powerful coalition that leverages what each one does best. And maybe most importantly, it gets everyone pulling in the same direction. It aligns financial goals with social goals, so they're working together instead of against each other. And that really leaves us with one final, pretty big question to think about. If we can keep breaking down these old walls between charity and investment, if we can get really creative about how we combine our resources, what other impossible challenges could we actually start to solve? Have you ever thought about how a huge city could stop a disaster before it even happens? Well, today we're diving into the incredible story of how New York City did just that. It turned to a really unlikely hero to solve a life or death problem: data. This is a story about a radical shift in thinking that ended up saving countless lives. And that big shift, it really kicked off with this core belief from then-Mayor Michael Bloomberg. This wasn't just some catchy phrase for a poster. It was a mandate, a new rule for how the city was going to operate. It forced everyone to move away from just gut feelings and start using hard evidence. So this is the big question we're really digging into today. I mean, it's one thing to react to a crisis after the fact, right? But it's something else entirely to stop that crisis from ever even happening. That's the massive challenge New York City set for itself, and the answer they came up with was truly revolutionary. But here's the surprising part. This story, it doesn't actually begin with fires or the FDNY. Nope, it starts almost a decade earlier, with a completely different public safety crisis: crime. It's kind of hard to imagine now, but back in the early 90s, New York City was in a really tough spot. Crime was out of control, and the city had this reputation for being one of the most violent places on the planet. Something desperately had to change. That change came from the new police commissioner, a guy named Bill Bratton. He brought in this system called CompStat, and the core idea was so simple, but wow, was it a game changer. He basically said the job of the police shouldn't just be about catching criminals after they commit a crime. It should be about stopping the crime from happening in the first place. And get this groundbreaking idea didn't start with supercomputers or some complex AI. It began with the basics: a huge map of the city and colored pushpins to track where crimes are happening. The real secret sauce, though? Relentless accountability. Bratton held meetings twice a week where he would grill precinct commanders on their numbers right in front of all their peers. Talk about pressure. And the results? They were absolutely staggering. By the end of the decade, citywide crime had been cut in half. 50%. CompStat was a massive, undeniable success, and pretty soon, cities all over the world started trying to copy it. So with a success story that big, you'd think the city would just, copy and paste that formula everywhere, right? Well, they definitely tried, but as it turns out, it wasn't quite that simple. So when the city tried to bring this model over to the fire department with a program they called Firemark, it was a total flop. It failed miserably. So why did it fail? Well, CompStat worked because you had real leadership commitment, crystal clear metrics, and really tough accountability. Firemark, it had none of that, and it proves a really important lesson. You can't just copy a system. You have to copy the commitment and the culture that makes it work. It was going to take something much more profound to force real change at the fire department. In fact, tragically, it would take two of the biggest disasters in the city's history to finally create the urgency for a complete overhaul. First, of course, the 9/11 attacks exposed some really serious systemic problems in the FDNY's ability to manage a crisis on that scale. And then, in 2007, a fire in the abandoned Deutsche Bank building right next to the World Trade Center site. Well, that turned out to be the final, heartbreaking catalyst for change. The investigation afterwards was just devastating. It discovered that 2 firefighters died because there was literally no water to fight the fire. A crucial water pipe, it's called a standpipe, had been cut. On top of that, the building's escape routes were improperly blocked. Both of these were massive failures that absolutely should have been caught during routine inspections. But those inspections, they just never happened. And here's why those inspections fell through the cracks. In 2007, the city's entire fire inspection system was an unbelievable mess. The records were handwritten on index cards, they were stored in pencil, and they were scattered across more than 220 firehouses. With no central database, headquarters had absolutely no way to track what was going on. It was a system just waiting to fail. The deaths of those 2 firefighters sent a shockwave through the entire department. And this quote from Commissioner Scapetta, it really captures that cultural shift. All of a sudden, everyone understood that inspections weren't just boring paperwork. They were a matter of life and death, for the public and for their own firefighters. Okay, so with this newfound urgency, the city finally had the will to build a new FDNY from the ground up. But they knew they couldn't do it alone. So they put together what you could only call a dream team. This partnership was unprecedented. It brought together the best of the best from government, from academia, and from private industry, all laser-focused on solving this one incredibly complex problem. Now, the first problem they tackled wasn't technology, it was the people. The FDNI's top officers were, without a doubt, brilliant firefighters, but they had very little training in things like management or data analysis. So they created the FDNY Officers Management Institute, or FOMI, to teach a whole new generation of leaders how to think like managers. And a huge part of that was changing the whole culture around inspections. As the former commissioner once said, inspections were not firefighters' favorite activity. In fact, and this is wild, their union contracts limited inspections to just 2 days a week and only when the weather was nice. That absolutely had to change. All right, the second piece of the puzzle was the process itself. The goal here wasn't just to digitize that old, messy paper system. No way. The goal, working with IBM, was to build something totally new, a smart, predictive system that could analyze all sorts of data and actually tell inspectors which buildings were most likely to have a fire. But to be truly predictive, they needed data from outside the fire department. And that's where the small, elite team from the mayor's office came into play. They were nicknamed the Geek Squad, and their special skill was breaking down the walls between city agencies. They could get crucial data from, say, the buildings department or the finance department, information that could point to a higher risk of fire. So, after years of work, all these partnerships, and a complete cultural transformation, did it work? What were the results of this massive, massive effort? The result was nothing short of incredible. Since the risk-based inspection system launched in 2013, the number of fatal fires in New York City has remained at historically low levels. The system worked. It was actually saving lives. So what's the big takeaway here? Well, the success of both CompStat and the new FDNY system created this powerful, repeatable model for solving big city problems. First, you redefine the mission around prevention, not just reaction. Second, you designate clear metrics to actually measure success. And third, you use that data to hold everyone accountable for the results. And that leaves us with a final, really fascinating question. This approach completely transformed how New York City dealt with crime and with fire. It proved that data, when it's used the right way, can be one of the most powerful tools we have for the public good. So the question we should all be asking is, what other massive problems could we solve if we just followed the data? Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a question that has challenged nonprofits and governments forever. When your resources are limited, how do you decide which good is the most good? we're going to break down a really cool new framework that tries to answer exactly that. So just imagine for a second you're running a city and you've got a tough choice on your plate. You could save 14 lives pretty much right away with one program, or you could save 17 lives down the road, but it's going to cost you more. How on earth do you choose? And this isn't just some thought experiment. This is the kind of thing organizations wrestle with every single day. And, the problem gets even more complicated when you're not even comparing the same kinds of things. I mean, how do you weigh saving a life against, say, producing clean energy? It's like they're two totally different currencies of social good. Without some kind of common language to compare them, a lot of these big decisions end up being based on gut feelings instead of hard data. And that right there is the heart of what we call the social value dilemma. It's this ongoing search for a universal yardstick, a single way to measure all kinds of social impact. And let me tell you, it's a puzzle that has stumped some incredibly smart people for a very long time. Think about it like this. The business world has a simple universal language, right? It's money. Profit, loss, ROI, it's all measured in dollars. But the public and nonprofit worlds, their whole goal is making society better, and they've never really had a tool like that to figure out where to put their capital. Now, of course, it's not like nobody's tried to solve this. There have been a lot of really smart frameworks developed over the years. So let's take a quick tour of some of these attempts, and you'll start to see where they fall a little short. So, for instance, you've got the daily, which is fantastic for public health stuff, but totally useless for, say, an education program. Then there's BACO, which is great for comparing costs, but it can completely miss the quality of what a program delivers. Every tool you see here is powerful in its own little world, but none of them gives us that universal yardstick we're looking for. So what we're left with is this big gap. We need a system that can finally bridge that divide between saving lives from fires and creating renewable energy. Something that gives us a reliable way to compare them. And most importantly, it has to have a way to measure not just the amount of impact, but the quality of that impact too. Okay, so this is where a really clever idea comes into play. It's called the impact rate of return, or IRR for short. And what's so cool about it is that it borrows a really powerful idea straight from the world of finance to solve this social problem. Now, don't get bogged down by the math on this slide, okay? The big idea here is just to see the parallel. In finance, investors use a formula to figure out the time value of money. Basically, what a dollar in the future is worth today. The IRR formula takes that exact same logic and applies it to calculate the impact value of money, how much social good you're going to get from an investment over time. What this basically does is boil everything down to a single number, a percentage that shows you the social return on your investment. And this, finally, lets an organization make a real apples-to-apples comparison between two completely different strategies that are aimed at the same big social goal. The way the formula works is by mixing together 4 key ingredients. It looks at the future impact, how efficient the project is, and how long it's going to take. But the secret sauce, the real game changer here, is that second one, the impact multiplier. This is basically a score that an organization gives to represent the quality of the outcome, not just the raw numbers. This all sounds great in theory, right? But what does it look like in the real world? Well, let's check out a case study with the Fire Department of New York to see the IRRS in action. All right, so here's the setup. The FD&Y has a very clear goal: stop the 48 fire-related deaths that happened in 1 year. To do that, they're looking at 3 different high-tech smoke detector programs, and they've got to figure out which one is the smartest investment. And this table lays out all the data. You can see each project's expected impact, how many lives it'll probably save, and then you see its cost, how long it'll take, and that all-important quality score, the impact multiplier. So, when they run the numbers through the IRR formula, bam, Project 3 is the clear winner with a return of almost 24%. But wait a second, that seems kind of weird, right? If you look back at that table, it's the most expensive option, and it takes the longest. So why in the world did it come out on top? The answer, and this is so cool, is hidden inside the calculation, specifically in that impact multiplier. See, Project 3 got a quality score of 0.90, which was way higher than the 0.80 for the other 2. That one little variable is what shot it to the top. And this is where the story gets really interesting. So why the high score? Well, Project 3's smoke detectors were easier for people to install, and they had a much better fail-safe system that talked directly to FDNY command. The IRR model showed that investing more money and time up front for a higher quality solution would actually create a much bigger social return in the long run. The FDNY case is a really powerful example of what this tool can do. But like any tool, it is not a magic bullet. It has incredible promise, for sure, but there are also some serious pitfalls we need to understand. On one hand, the promise of IRR is obvious. You get a standard, predictive tool that actually bakes quality into your decisions. But on the other hand, the peril is just as clear. The whole model depends entirely on human judgment. Those quality scores, the definition of impact itself, all of that has to be set by people. And this quote from the source material just nails it. One of the greatest strengths of the impact rate of return model, its customizability, is also the source of its greatest vulnerability. In other words, garbage in, garbage out. This means that the math, that's actually the easy part. The real hard work is in the setup. It means you have to bring together experts, community members, stakeholders, everyone to have those tough but necessary conversations about what success and quality actually mean for a project. So at the end of the day, what's the big takeaway? A tool like IRR can absolutely help us make smarter, better decisions, but it can't make them for us. The tool is only as good as the people using it. And that leaves us with one final, really important question. If you were designing a project for your community, who would you bring to the table to help define what truly matters?
The 2016 Rio Olympics. You know, it was supposed to be this huge coming out party, right? A moment for a rising Brazil to show off this incredible city of the future. But behind all that spectacle, well, there was a really controversial story of ambition, exclusion, and, yeah, corruption. And that's what we're going to dig into.
I mean, the dream was spectacular. A completely revitalized Rio, with these breathtaking new buildings like the Museum of Tomorrow as its symbol. This was the vision they sold to the world, a modern, sustainable 21st century city just rising up on the shores of Guanabara Bay. But you know, out on the streets, a totally different story was playing out. There were these huge protests popping up everywhere. People felt completely, totally shut out of the whole process. And they asked this one crucial question: Olympics for whom? It just perfectly captured this feeling that, hey, this transformation, it isn't for us, the people who actually live here.
So, what's the final verdict on the Rio Games? Was it a stunning success that left this amazing positive legacy, or was it a catastrophic failure that just wasted billions of dollars and made inequality even worse? Well, to figure that out, we've got to look a little closer.
So who was behind all this? Well, at the heart of this whole grand vision was one guy, Eduardo Paes, Rio's really controversial and, let's say, hard-driving mayor. He saw the Olympics as the perfect chance to fast-track decades of development and basically remake the city in his own image.
And man, the timeline was just relentless. He gets elected in 2008, and just 1 year later, boom, Rio gets the bid. From that exact moment, it was an absolute sprint to 2016. These massive projects, like the Porto Maravilha redevelopment, they started almost immediately. The pressure was just immense.
And look, to be fair, the physical transformation was pretty astonishing. Using that Olympic deadline like a hammer, the mayor's administration just pushed forward these massive projects at a scale and speed that was frankly almost unbelievable.
And there's no better symbol of this than the demolition of the old perimetral elevated highway. The city literally tore down this massive piece of its past to open up this derelict port area called Porto Maravilha, creating millions of square feet for brand new development.
And the money, wow, the money involved here was just staggering. The Porto Maravilha redevelopment, and remember, that's just one piece of the whole Olympic puzzle, was expected to pull in nearly $3 billion in investment. This was mega project development on a completely different level. But this is where the whole story takes a really dark turn. That breakneck speed and that top-down approach, it came at a huge cost. The partnerships that were put together to build this new Rio, well, they were deeply, and you have to wonder if it was deliberately, flawed. And you know what? The mayor's own words kind of tell you everything you need to know. He brushed off critics, he even famously called protesters morons, and he saw any complaint as a sign of progress. This was not a leader who was looking for collaboration. This was a leader who believed the ends justified pretty much any means.
So you can see this fundamental disconnect, right? On one hand, you have successful large-scale projects that depend on collaboration, respect, and transparency, but Rio's approach,
It was the exact opposite. A closed process, almost zero room for public input, which just created this deep resentment and distrust. And this lack of transparency, it created the absolute perfect storm for corruption. It all happened at the same time as Brazil's huge Operation Car Wash scandal, this sprawling investigation into bribes from overbilling the state oil company. And it didn't take long to figure out that the Olympic contracts were part of the very same pay-to-play scheme.
All right, so the games are over, the athletes have gone home, the world's media has left. What's left? The legacy of the Rio Olympics is, well, it's a study in contrasts, a mix of undeniable successes and just tragic failures.
And this is where it gets really stark. On one hand, you've got the magnificent Museum of Tomorrow, which became the most visited museum in the entire country. And on the other hand, just 6 months after the Games, you had reports of these multi-million-dollar venues already abandoned, just rotting white elephants.
So if you were to make a report card, it's really a mixed bag. Mass transit use shot up from 18% to 63%. That's a huge win. But the new lines often completely bypassed the low-income favelas that needed them the most. The promises to clean up the polluted Guanabara Bay? Broken. And in the end, Mayor Pais himself was accused of pocketing millions in kickbacks from Olympic contracts.
So, how could this have been done differently? Well, there's a framework called social value investing that actually helps diagnose exactly where projects like this go so wrong, and it offers a kind of blueprint for how to build better in the future.
Okay, so this framework, it's basically a checklist for successful partnerships. It's all about 5 key areas. You've got process. How do you plan and work together? People, is the leadership collaborative? Place, is the local community treated like a real partner? Portfolio, are all the investments aligned? And finally, performance, how do you actually measure success? Rio's failures can be traced back to some really serious flaws in almost all of these.
Let's just focus on one of those 5 for a second. One where Rio critically failed. Place. A place-based strategy basically means you treat the local community as true partners, not just people things happen to. You give them a real voice in the projects that are going to transform their lives.
And Rio's leadership? They just completely ignored this. By not engaging the residents, they created resentment, they fueled protests, and in the end, they actually limited the long-term success of the very things they were building. People just didn't feel like the new Rio was built for them.
And the price tag for all of this? Just staggering. While the numbers vary a bit, the highest estimate for the total cost of the Rio Olympics is $20 billion. An enormous amount of money for a project with such a fractured legacy.
So at the end of the day, Rio is this powerful cautionary tale. Cities are always going to dream big. They're always going to build massive projects. The real question that Rio forces every single one of us to ask isn't if we should build them, but how we build them, and most importantly, who are we building them for?